Hello there, and welcome back to Stories for Sleep. Tonight, before we bring another long day to a gentle close and allow our minds to drift toward the quiet stillness of sleep, I would like to invite you to explore a story that seems, at first glance, quite ordinary. A story that begins with something so familiar that most of us rarely stop to think about it. Milk, as simply liquid, soft, delicate, unassuming, and yet, from this humble substance, humanity has created thousands of different cheeses across the world. Cheeses that carry the scent of spring meadows, the memory of ancient caves, the traditions of medieval monasteries, and the silent labor of countless invisible microorganisms. If we were to look at cheese through the eyes of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, it would become more than food. It would become a symbol of transformation. Just as the human soul does not mature overnight, milk cannot become cheese in an instant. It requires time. It requires quiet change. It requires the cooperation of forces too small for the naked eye to see. And perhaps that is precisely what makes the story of cheese so much deeper than we usually imagine. Tonight, we will explore some of the most fascinating secrets hidden within the world of cheese. We will encounter cheeses aged inside mountain caves, tiny bacteria that create astonishingly complex flavors, traditions that have survived for thousands of years, and stories about how one simple food helped shape human history, culture, and civilization. So find a comfortable position, relax your shoulders, take a slow breath in, and allow the concerns of today to drift gently into the background. If you enjoy calm journeys through science, history, nature, and the mysterious depths of the human mind, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss future adventures. And now, let us begin. This is the story of one of humanity's oldest, most remarkable, and most delicious inventions. The story of cheese, Part 1. Cheese, a miracle made from milk. Tonight, before we journey deeper into the strange and enchanting world of cheese, I would like to invite you to do something very simple. Imagine, for a moment, a bowl filled with fresh milk sitting before you. Nothing extraordinary, just milk, a gentle white liquid that human beings have known for thousands of years. Perhaps you have seen it countless times throughout your life. Perhaps you drank it as a child. Perhaps you have never spent much time thinking about it at all. And yet inside this seemingly simple liquid lies one of the most extraordinary stories of transformation in human history. Because from milk, humanity has created thousands of different cheeses, from the soft, creamy brie of France, to wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano aged for years in Italy, to blue cheeses marked by dark veins that run through them like mysterious rivers hidden inside stone. All of them begin with the same ingredient, milk, and that reminds me of an idea Carl Jung often returned to throughout his work. He believed that within every human being there exist unrealized possibilities, potentials still sleeping, future forms waiting to emerge. And in a way, milk is much the same. When you look at milk, you cannot see cheese. You cannot see complex flavors. You cannot see the crystalline crunch of Parmesan. You cannot see the delicate white rind of brie. You cannot smell the aromas that will appear months or even years later. All of those things remain hidden, like a seed that has not yet sprouted, like a story that has not yet been told, like a part of ourselves we have not yet discovered. And then, something remarkable begins to happen, not through magic, but through nature, through tiny organisms invisible to the human eye, through silent enzymes at work, through salt, through temperature, through humidity, and above all, through time. If there is one secret character that appears throughout the story of cheese, it is time itself. Not time measured by clocks, but time measured by transformation, the time of growth, the time of quiet change unfolding in darkness. In many ancient cheese-aging cellars throughout Europe, thousands of wheels of cheese rest quietly on wooden shelves, day after day, week after week. month after month, year after year. At first glance, it seems as though nothing is happening, but in reality, an entire universe is in motion. Millions of bacteria are working, proteins are being broken apart, fats are changing their structure, aromas are slowly emerging, textures are transforming, something entirely new is being born, in silence. Perhaps that is why I have always found cheese strangely beautiful, because it reminds us that the most important changes rarely happen where we can see them. They happen in darkness, in patience, in processes hidden from view. Jung spent much of his life studying the invisible regions of the mind. He believed that our deepest transformations occur beneath the surface of consciousness. They are not loud, not dramatic, not easily noticed, and yet they quietly shape who we become. And when I look at a wheel of cheese maturing in a cellar, it is difficult not to think about that idea, because beneath its seemingly still exterior exists an entire living ecosystem, a bustling community of microorganisms. These tiny creatures are performing work they have been doing for millions of years, long before human beings appeared. They eat, they grow, they interact, they transform their surroundings, and in doing so, they create flavors that human beings cherish. One of the most fascinating facts about many famous cheeses is that they are still alive. Not alive in the sense that they think or feel, but alive because the bacteria within them continue to work, even after the cheese has been placed on a dining table, even after it has been sold in a market, even after it rests quietly inside someone's refrigerator. The microscopic life within continues, silently, patiently, constantly. This means that cheese is not a static product. It is a process, a journey, an event that is still unfolding. No two moments are exactly the same. A cheese at 6 months is different from itself at 12 months. A cheese at 1 year is different from itself at 3 years. Just as human beings are constantly changing, even when we do not realize it, even when we believe we are exactly the same person, time continues doing its work. Every experience, every memory, every encounter, every loss, every joy leaves a small mark within us. Just as bacteria leave their mark within cheese, just as time leaves its flavor within milk, there is something deeply comforting about that idea. That growth cannot be forced. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be completed overnight. It requires time, just as cheese requires time. And perhaps that is the first lesson cheese has to offer us. That good things are often worth waiting for. That genuine transformation happens slowly. That sometimes the wisest thing we can do is trust the process. As our journey continues tonight, we will explore the ancient secrets of cheesemaking, invisible microorganisms, mysterious caves, recipes thousands of years old, and the remarkable stories that transformed a simple ingredient into one of the most extraordinary inventions of human civilization. But first, let us pause for one more moment and reflect on this. That within a single drop of milk, there has always existed the possibility of becoming something entirely different. And perhaps the same is true for us. Part 2. The 1,000-year history of cheese. In the previous chapter, we paused to appreciate something that appears remarkably simple, yet contains a profound kind of beauty. That from an ordinary liquid called milk, time, bacteria, enzymes, and patience can create something entirely different, a wheel of cheese. A living ecosystem, a collaboration between nature and human beings. And when we look at a mature cheese, a natural question begins to emerge. When did humans first start doing this? Who was the first person to discover that milk could become cheese? Who was curious enough to taste that strange, solidified milk? And how did such a humble discovery remain beside humanity for thousands of years? Tonight, we will travel backward through time, not merely centuries, not merely millennia, but all the way back to an age before electricity, before refrigeration, before food factories, before supermarkets overflowing with goods. A world in which survival depended directly upon the ability to preserve food. A world where every drop of milk was precious. And it was within that world that the story of cheese began. Today, archaeologists have discovered ancient traces of cheesemaking in pottery vessels, food processing tools, and even tombs thousands of years old. These discoveries feel almost like letters sent from the distant past, whispers from people who lived long before history was fully written down. What is remarkable is that although time can rot wood, corrode metal, and erase the marks of entire civilizations, it has still preserved evidence that cheese was present in human life from the very beginning. What does that tell us? It tells us that cheese was not originally created as a luxury. It was a solution, a survival technology, an answer to a very practical question. How can milk last longer? Today, we are accustomed to opening a refrigerator whenever we wish. A carton of milk can remain fresh for days, but thousands of years ago, such convenience did not exist. Milk was a precious gift, yet it was also fragile. Under the warmth of the sun, it spoiled quickly. Within a short time, this nourishing liquid could become unusable. For communities that depended on livestock, this was a significant challenge. They had cows, they had goats, they had sheep, but they had no reliable way to preserve fresh milk for long periods. And from that challenge, creativity emerged. One famous theory suggests that ancient herders transported milk in containers made from animal stomachs. To us, that may sound unusual, but to them, it was simply a natural material readily available. What they did not know was that the lining of those stomachs contained a special enzyme, an enzyme we now call rennet. When milk was carried inside these containers during long journeys, exposed to warmth and constant movement, something unexpected happened. The milk began to curdle, separating into solid curds and liquid whey. A primitive form of cheese was born. No one knows exactly how that moment unfolded. No one knows the name of the first person who witnessed it. But I often like to imagine that scene. A herder opening his leather container after a long day of travel, expecting to find milk, and instead discovering something entirely different. Something thicker, something denser, something unfamiliar. Perhaps he hesitated. Perhaps he was curious. Perhaps he tasted it. And perhaps, from that tiny moment, one of humanity's oldest culinary traditions was born. Carl Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct." I think that idea applies beautifully to the first cheesemakers. They had no laboratories, no microscopes, no understanding of bacteria, no knowledge of enzymes, but they observed, they experimented, they learned from nature, and little by little, they uncovered secrets that science would only explain thousands of years later. Perhaps that is what makes the story of cheese so beautiful. It is proof that human beings have always possessed the ability to learn from the world around them, not by controlling nature, but by cooperating with it. The bacteria did their work, the enzymes did theirs, time did its part, and humans learned how to guide the process. As civilizations grew, the craft of cheesemaking matured alongside them. From small villages to ancient cities, from nomadic tribes to powerful empires, cheese appeared everywhere. The ancient Egyptians knew it. The ancient Greeks loved it. The Romans transformed it into a sophisticated craft. Roman writings describe numerous cheese-making techniques in remarkable detail, and that tells us something important. Even thousands of years ago, people understood that cheese was more than food. It was knowledge. It was skill. It was culture. Yet what moves me most is not the history of cheese itself. It is what that history reveals about human beings. Because when we look back, we discover that people living thousands of years ago were not so different from us. They worried about the future. They tried to feed their families. They sought ways to preserve what was valuable. They hoped to transform something fragile into something lasting. And in a very deep sense, that is exactly what all of us are trying to do. We preserve memories. We protect what we love. We attempt to turn fleeting moments into something more enduring. Perhaps that is why the story of cheese is not merely a story about food. It is a story about humanity's desire to overcome impermanence. A story about learning how to resist decay. And strangely enough, the thing that made this possible was time itself. Because time, the force that eventually takes everything away, is also the most important ingredient in making cheese. A beautiful paradox. And a paradox we will explore more deeply in the next chapter. Because if history tells us how cheese first appeared, the next question is even more fascinating. What actually happens during the months and years that a wheel of cheese rests quietly in an aging cellar? How does time transform flavor? How does an older cheese become more valuable? And why do cheesemakers often say that their most important ingredient is not milk, but time? Part 3. Time, the most important ingredient. In the previous chapter, we traveled back through history. We met ancient herders carrying milk inside containers made from animal stomachs. We witnessed how an accidental discovery became one of humanity's oldest methods of food preservation. And as that story unfolded, a remarkable idea emerged. A beautiful paradox. That time, the force that takes everything away can also become the most important ingredient in creating cheese. At first, this sounds strange. When we think of ingredients, we usually imagine things we can touch. Milk, salt, enzymes, bacteria, things that visibly exist before us. But if you ask a producer of Parmigiano Reggiano in northern Italy what the most valuable ingredient in their cheese is, they may not answer milk. They may answer time. Not days, not weeks, but years. Some wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano are aged for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, sometimes even longer. In the modern world, those numbers seem enormous. We live in an age designed for speed. Messages arrive in seconds. Meals arrive in minutes. Information appears with a single touch of a screen. We have become accustomed to immediacy. And perhaps that is precisely why ancient cheese-aging cellars feel so special to me. Because stepping into one is like stepping into another timeline. A world moving at a slower rhythm. A more patient rhythm. A deeper rhythm. Imagine a vast cellar filled with thousands of wheels of cheese arranged in endless rows. The gentle aroma of fermented milk lingering in the air. Soft, dim light. Wooden shelves that have survived for generations. And upon them, wheels of cheese quietly maturing. At first glance, nothing appears to be happening. But that is only what the eye perceives. At the microscopic level, an entire universe is in motion. Enzymes continue their work. Bacteria continue transforming their environment. Proteins change. Fats evolve. Every day, the cheese becomes slightly different. Not enough for us to notice, but enough for time to leave its signature. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." I often think of this idea when learning about cheese, because a mature cheese is not merely an older cheese. It is a transformed cheese, a product of countless small changes unfolding over time. And perhaps the same is true of human beings. No one becomes mature simply because they grow older. What creates maturity are the transformations within, experiences, lessons, losses, moments of joy, periods of silence. Time alone does not create depth. But time combined with transformation does. And that is exactly what is happening inside those wheels resting quietly in the cellar. One of the most important changes involves protein. Milk contains large protein molecules called casein. At first, they provide the structural foundation of the cheese. But over time, enzymes begin cutting them into smaller pieces. The process is extraordinarily slow, silent, patient. Long protein chains gradually break apart into peptides and amino acids, and these new compounds help create what we call umami, a flavor that is difficult to describe, not quite salty, not quite sweet, not quite sour, but rich, deep, satisfying, like listening to a piece of music layered with many harmonies. What is fascinating is that these flavors cannot be created instantly. They require time, a great deal of time. Just as a novel cannot be read in a single sentence, just as a forest cannot grow overnight, just as the human soul cannot be completed in a single moment. And while proteins are changing, fats begin their own journey as well. They break down into countless aromatic compounds. Some create nutty notes. Some suggest dried fruits. Some evoke butter. Others produce complex aromas that even experts struggle to describe precisely. Every wheel of cheese becomes a chemical symphony. No instrument performs alone. Every element interacts with every other. And the conductor of this orchestra is time. Perhaps that is why cheesemaking is both science and art. Because cheesemakers cannot force maturity. They cannot command time. They can only create the right conditions. Observe, monitor, care, like gardeners, like teachers, like artisans. Every day they check temperature, humidity. They turn the wheels, clean the surfaces, watch for the smallest signs of change. Not to accelerate time, but to protect the process. There is something deeply beautiful about that image. Because in life, we often want control. We want to know exactly when results will arrive. We want to speed things up. We want to skip the waiting. But cheese reminds us of a different truth. Some things only emerge when we are patient enough. Not every value is created through speed. Some values are created through depth. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." I think that is also the story of cheese, because throughout the aging process, it is becoming itself, day by day, month by month, year by year, not rushing, not forcing, not trying to become something else, simply fulfilling the potential that was already present within it when it was still milk. And perhaps that is what life is trying to teach us as well. That growth is not about moving faster. It is about allowing the process to unfold, allowing time to do its work, allowing small changes to accumulate into something remarkable. When we look at a wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano aged for many years, we are not merely looking at milk. We are looking at time. We are looking at patience. We are looking at thousands of days of transformation preserved within every tiny crystal. Perhaps that is why cheese lovers often say something very beautiful, that a mature cheese is simply time made edible. And if that is true, then the next question becomes even more fascinating. Who are the invisible beings performing this miracle? Who is doing the work of transformation inside the darkness of ancient aging cellars? Because behind every wheel of cheese lies not only time, but an entire hidden world of bacteria, molds, and microscopic inhabitants quietly shaping its destiny. And that will be the story of our next chapter. A journey into the mysterious world of microorganisms and the tiny unseen citizens responsible for creating some of the most extraordinary flavors humanity has ever known. Part 4. The mysterious world of microorganisms. In the previous chapter, we explored a beautiful idea. That time is not merely something that passes. It is an ingredient, an invisible ingredient that helps create some of the most complex flavors in the world of cheese. We imagined wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano resting quietly in ancient aging cellars for years. At first glance, they seemed motionless. Yet inside, millions of chemical reactions continued to unfold. Proteins were changing. Fats were transforming. Aromas were slowly taking shape. And at the end of that journey, a question emerged. Who is doing all this work? Who are the invisible artisans behind the miracle of cheese? Tonight, we step into a world that the naked eye cannot see. A world so small that millions of its inhabitants could live upon the head of a pin. A world filled with creatures that remained unknown throughout most of human history. Yet it is also a world that has quietly accompanied humanity for thousands of years. It is the world of bacteria and molds. When many people hear those words, they immediately think of illness, spoiled food, things to avoid. But the fascinating truth is that without bacteria and molds, there would be no cheese, no brie, no camembert, no roquefort, no emmental, no hundreds, or even thousands of varieties of cheese known today. That reminds me of one of Carl Jung's most important ideas. He believed that human beings often fear what they do not understand. Yet many things we consider unpleasant or frightening may contain extraordinary value when viewed differently. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." I have always felt that this idea applies beautifully to the microbial world. For centuries, people did not know these organisms existed. They could not see them, could not name them, could not understand how they worked. Yet they were always there, quietly, patiently, doing what they do. And from that invisible world, some of humanity's most remarkable flavors emerged. Let us begin with one of the world's most famous cheeses, blue cheese. The first time many people see a piece of blue cheese, they are surprised. The blue veins winding through its interior resemble tiny rivers flowing through ancient stone. At first glance, they may appear to be signs of spoilage, but the reality is exactly the opposite. They are the result of a carefully controlled process. Those veins are created by beneficial molds. Their spores are intentionally introduced into the cheese. Later, cheesemakers create tiny openings that allow oxygen to travel deep inside. There, the mold begins to grow, slowly, patiently, like invisible painters creating a living masterpiece. And the wonder is that they do more than shape the appearance. They shape the flavor as well. Gentle sharpness, earthy notes, hints of mushrooms, subtle aromas reminiscent of nuts and forests. All of these emerge through the work of those tiny organisms. Viewed under a microscope, a piece of blue cheese is not a static object. It is a living city, a complex ecosystem, a community of organisms interacting with one another. And that is extraordinary, because when we taste blue cheese, we are not simply tasting milk. We are tasting the result of a long conversation between humanity and nature. Yet the microbial world holds even stranger stories. Think about Swiss cheese. You have probably seen its famous round holes. They are so iconic that they have become part of popular culture, in cartoons, in advertisements, in illustrations. Those holes have almost become synonymous with the word cheese. But how do they form? For centuries, that question remained a mystery. Today, we know the answer. The primary architects are bacteria. During aging, certain bacterial species produce carbon dioxide gas. That gas becomes trapped inside the cheese. Gradually, pockets form. Those pockets grow larger and eventually become the famous holes, which means that every hole inside Swiss cheese is, in a sense, a trace of bacterial breath. A strange thought, yet somehow a beautiful one. Because even the empty spaces inside cheese tell a story. Even absence is the result of life. Carl Jung spent much of his career studying the role of emptiness within the human psyche. He observed that what is absent can sometimes be just as meaningful as what is present. Unspoken words, forgotten memories, moments of silence, all carry significance. And in a way, the holes in Swiss cheese do as well. They remind us that even emptiness has a history. Even space has an origin. But the story does not end there. Scientists eventually discovered something even stranger. In recent years, the number of holes in certain Swiss cheeses has actually declined. At first, this puzzled researchers. The bacteria had not disappeared. The production process had not changed dramatically. So what had happened? After years of investigation, the answer came from a place nobody expected: hay dust. Yes, tiny particles of hay dust once played an important role in helping carbon dioxide gather into large bubbles. As modern dairy farming became cleaner and more mechanized, less hay dust entered the milk, and as a result, fewer holes formed inside the cheese. I have always loved that story, because it reminds us that reality is more interconnected than we often imagine. A tiny environmental change can produce unexpected consequences. Even a speck of dust can help shape the identity of a world-famous cheese. It also reminds me of how Jung viewed life. He believed that small things often exert greater influence than we realize. A dream, a memory, a conversation, a symbol, things that appear insignificant sometimes alter the course of an entire life, just as a tiny particle of hay can change an entire wheel of Emmental. When I reflect on the microbial world, what moves me most is not the science itself, it is the lesson it offers. That much of what creates beauty in life happens beyond our vision. Roots growing beneath the soil, stars forming within clouds of cosmic dust, memories developing within the soul, bacteria shaping flavor inside a wheel of cheese. All are quiet processes, invisible, patient, yet profoundly important. And perhaps that is why the microbial world is so fascinating, because it reminds us that the smallest things often create the greatest miracles. But if microorganisms are the invisible artisans of cheese, then an even more intriguing question awaits. What happens when humans deliberately collaborate with these creatures to create some of the strangest cheeses ever made? Cheeses nurtured by microscopic mites, cheeses involving living larvae, cheeses so powerfully aromatic that they have become legends. That will be the story of our next chapter, a journey into the world of the most unusual cheeses humanity has ever created. Part 5. The strangest cheeses in the world. In the previous chapter, we stepped into a world invisible to the naked eye, a world of bacteria, molds, and tiny organisms quietly working within every wheel of cheese. We explored the blue veins of blue cheese, the mysterious holes of Swiss cheese, and the astonishing story of how tiny particles of hay dust could influence the destiny of an Emmental wheel. All of that already seemed strange enough. Yet it turns out that those stories were only the beginning, because once human beings learned how to collaborate with the microbial world, their imagination began to travel even further, far enough that some of the cheeses they created can leave outsiders astonished, even bewildered. There are cheeses that seem almost impossible the first time you encounter them, cheeses that contain living creatures, cheeses matured in dark mountain caves, cheeses famous for aromas so powerful that they have become legends. And perhaps most fascinating of all, behind every unusual cheese lies a story of culture, history, and humanity's relationship with difference. Carl Jung once wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." I think this applies beautifully to cheese. What delights one person may make another hesitate. What is considered a masterpiece in one region may seem peculiar somewhere else. And yet it is precisely this diversity that makes human culture so beautiful. Let us begin with mimolette. At first glance, mimolette appears fairly ordinary, a deep orange cheese resembling the color of a sunset. But if you look closely at its rind, the story becomes much more interesting. During aging, the rind often becomes home to microscopic cheese mites, creatures so small they are nearly invisible. They crawl across the surface, consume tiny amounts of the rind, create countless miniature tunnels, and in doing so, contribute to the cheese's unique texture and flavor. What fascinates me is not the mites themselves, but the idea that a beloved food can carry the imprint of such tiny creatures. Once again, we see that nature does not operate according to the rigid boundaries humans often imagine. Everything is connected. Every organism participates in something larger than itself. If mimolette surprises us, Kazumazu takes surprise to an entirely different level. This famous cheese from the island of Sardinia may be one of the most controversial cheeses in the world. In traditional production, a particular species of fly lays eggs within the cheese. Larvae hatch and participate in the breakdown of fats. The result is a texture that becomes softer, richer, and dramatically different from its original state. To many modern people, this may sound difficult to accept. Yet for communities that have preserved the tradition across generations, kazu-mazu is more than food. It is identity, memory, family history, a piece of home. This reminds me of a theme Jung often explored: the power of tradition. He believed that cultural practices endure not merely because they are practical, they endure because they connect people to their roots, to their ancestors, to collective memory. And sometimes, understanding a tradition requires us to look beyond its surface. As our journey continues, we arrive in the mountains of northern Spain, the birthplace of cabrales, a blue cheese aged within natural mountain caves. When many people imagine a cheese cellar, they picture temperature-controlled rooms filled with modern technology. But cabrales matures inside real caves, places where mountain air, natural humidity, and stable temperatures create the perfect environment. Within the darkness of stone, within the silence of the mountains, the wheels slowly develop their distinctive blue veins. There is something deeply poetic about that image, because it reminds us that nature remains the greatest artist of all. Humans may guide the process, but the caves, the air, and time itself complete the masterpiece. If Cabrales is a story of wild nature, then Taleggio is a lesson about the deceptive nature of first impressions. Many people are hesitant the first time they encounter its aroma. The scent can be strong, sometimes compared to damp earth after rain, or the atmosphere of an ancient cellar. Yet the flavor itself tells a completely different story: gentle, creamy, soft, far friendlier than the nose initially predicts. I have always loved such paradoxes, because they appear throughout life as well. Some people seem distant but are deeply kind. Some experiences appear frightening at first but become cherished memories. Some of the most rewarding doors lie just beyond our initial hesitation. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Perhaps the same is true of cheeses with unusual appearances or aromas. They challenge our assumptions and invite us to examine our own judgments. Then there is Epoisses, a true legend in the world of cheese. This French cheese is so famous for its aroma that stories about it have become almost mythical. Some adore it, some avoid it, but very few remain indifferent. What creates the reputation of Epoisses is not merely its powerful scent. It is the depth of flavor hidden behind that scent. Once again, we encounter a familiar lesson. The surface rarely tells the entire story. And finally, let us visit raclette. If the previous cheeses evoke mystery, raclette evokes warmth and togetherness. Its name comes from the act of scraping melted cheese onto food. On cold winter nights in the Alps, people gather together. The cheese is heated. Its surface softens and melts. Then it is scraped over potatoes, bread, or vegetables. It is more than a meal. It is a ritual, a communal moment, an experience designed to be shared. And perhaps that is the greatest gift cheese offers. Not merely flavor, but connection between people and nature, between past and present, between those seated around the same table. When I look back at all these unusual cheeses, I realize they are not truly strange at all. They are simply different expressions of creativity, different paths leading toward the same goal, transforming milk into something new, something unique, something carrying the unmistakable signature of a place and a culture. And perhaps that diversity is what makes the world of cheese so endlessly fascinating. But if these unusual cheeses represent the final result of creativity, then an even more intriguing question remains. How does all of this actually happen? What occurs at the molecular level when milk becomes cheese? How do enzymes perform their work? Why can mozzarella stretch? Why does brie ripen from the outside inward? And what allows a wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano to be tested with a silver hammer? That will be the journey of our next chapter. A voyage into the mysterious and enchanting science behind the art of cheesemaking. Part 6. The science behind cheesemaking. In the previous chapter, we journeyed through some of the most fascinating corners of the cheese world. We met the tiny mites living on the rind of Mimolette, the misty caves where Cabrales matures in darkness, the legendary wheels of Epoisses whose aromas have become the subject of stories and folklore, and the winter evenings where melted raclette brings people together around a shared table. All of these stories make cheese seem almost like a form of ancient magic, something mysterious, difficult to explain, nearly mythical. Yet behind every miracle lies an invisible structure, a hidden order, a deeper set of rules. And the world of cheese is no exception. Beneath its rich flavors, beneath its colorful rinds, beneath traditions that have endured for centuries, there exists a world of enzymes, proteins, bacteria, humidity, temperature, and chemical reactions, unfolding as slowly as the breathing of time itself. Carl Jung once wrote, "Nature is not matter only, she is also spirit." Perhaps that is the most beautiful way to enter this chapter, because science does not diminish the beauty of cheese. If anything, it reveals the miracle more clearly. Just as understanding how a piece of music is composed does not lessen its emotional power, it deepens our appreciation of it. Every story of cheese begins with a very small moment, a moment invisible to the naked eye, the moment when milk begins to coagulate. And the main character of that moment is something called rennet. Today, rennet is often described simply as an enzyme, but throughout the history of cheesemaking, it has been more like a key that unlocks the first door of transformation. In its natural state, the proteins in milk drift through the liquid like travelers floating along a river. Everything is relatively stable, relatively loose, but when rennet arrives, that order begins to change. The enzyme acts upon casein, the most important protein found in milk. Proteins that once remained separate begin to connect, like strangers suddenly reaching out and holding hands. Gradually, a network forms. The milk begins to thicken. Then it solidifies. A new substance emerges. Cheesemakers call it curd. If milk is the beginning of the story, then curd is its first chapter. It is the moment when potential begins to take shape. Jung often spoke about the process of becoming. He believed that every human being carries within them an unfinished form, a possibility waiting to emerge. That idea often reminds me of curd, because at that moment, cheese is not yet truly cheese, and yet it has already begun to become what it will eventually be. Like a child who does not yet know what kind of adult they will become, like a seed that does not yet know whether it will grow into a towering tree or a small flowering bush. Once curd appears, the journey begins to branch into many paths, and each path leads toward a different kind of cheese. Consider mozzarella, the famous soft cheese of Italy. What makes mozzarella special is not the ingredients themselves. It is the way the curd is treated. When the curd reaches the proper state, cheesemakers immerse it in hot water. Then they stretch it, fold it, stretch it again, repeating the process over and over. During this transformation, the proteins rearrange themselves into new patterns, like threads being woven into soft silk. The result is the elastic texture we recognize today. When you slice fresh mozzarella, you can often see delicate strands stretching within it. That is not merely food, it is the visible trace of a physical and chemical process refined through generations. Then we arrive at cheddar. If mozzarella resembles a graceful dance, cheddar feels more disciplined. Cheesemakers use a distinctive technique known as cheddaring. After the curd forms, it is cut into blocks, stacked, turned, pressed, restacked, repeated again and again. This process removes moisture while restructuring the proteins, gradually creating the firm texture for which cheddar is known. There is something almost meditative about that image. A simple action repeated many times, not out of urgency, but out of precision, like art, like meditation, like personal growth. The greatest changes often emerge from small actions repeated over a long period of time. Yet perhaps no cheese tells the story of transformation more beautifully than brie. Brie does not ripen from the inside outward, as many people assume. It ripens from the outside inward. The white mold on its surface is where the process begins. Day by day, the softness slowly moves deeper toward the center, like light gradually entering a dark room. It reminds me of another famous quotation from Jung: "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Brie feels almost like a physical version of that idea, a journey from the outer layer toward the inner essence, a slow awakening, quiet, gentle, unhurried. As our journey continues, we enter the caves of Roquefort. In the modern world, we are accustomed to controlling environments with machines, but Roquefort still depends upon something far older: nature itself. The limestone caves of southern France create nearly perfect levels of humidity and temperature. Cool air currents flow through cracks in the rock, carrying precisely the conditions needed for Penicillium roqueforti to flourish. Without those caves, there would be no Roquefort. And that reminds us of something important. No matter how far science advances, some things remain inseparable from the places where they were born, just like people. We all carry traces of our homeland, our climate, our memories, the landscapes that shaped us, and then we return to Parmigiano Reggiano, perhaps one of the most respected cheeses in the world. After years of aging, each wheel is examined using a small hammer. An expert gently taps the surface, listening carefully to the sound. A clear tone, or a dull one, a subtle vibration, can reveal invisible imperfections hidden within. That has always fascinated me, because sometimes quality is not judged by what the eyes can see, but by what the ears can hear, a lesson remarkably similar to life itself. Not everything valuable is visible on the surface. Finally, we arrive at Gruyere. As it matures over long periods of time, proteins continue to break down, and eventually, tiny crystals begin to appear. When you bite into them, they provide a delicate crunch. Many people encountering them for the first time assume they are flaws, but in reality, they are signs of maturity, evidence that time has done its work. I have always found that beautiful, because those crystals resemble tiny stars born from time itself, visible signs of an invisible journey. When I look back at the entire process of cheesemaking, what moves me most is the balance between science and art. Everything follows natural laws, yet nothing feels mechanical. A cheesemaker must understand enzymes, but also intuition, must understand temperature, but also patience, must understand science, but also trust the process. Perhaps that is what makes cheese one of humanity's most beautiful creations. It is where knowledge and feeling meet, where laboratories meet open pastures, where bacteria meet artistry, where time meets flavor. And once we understand the invisible rules behind this transformation, a larger question begins to emerge. How did an invention as simple as cheese help shape human history itself? How did the first wheels of cheese become part of trade, civilization, and cultural development? That will be the story of our next chapter, a journey that takes us beyond the aging cellar and into the vast flow of human history. Part 8. The influence of geography and nature. In the previous chapter, we discovered something truly fascinating. That cheese is not merely food, it is part of history, part of trade, part of civilization itself. From the nomadic peoples of ancient grasslands to the stone roads of Rome, from the quiet monasteries of the Middle Ages to the trade routes connecting distant lands, cheese has traveled alongside humanity for thousands of years. But then a natural question arises. If cheesemaking techniques spread across the world, why did every region create such different flavors? Why is a Manchego from Spain so different from a Parmigiano Reggiano from Italy? Why does Roquefort from France taste unlike feta from Greece? And why do cheese lovers often say they can taste an entire landscape within a single piece of cheese? To answer that question, we must return to a very simple truth. Every cheese begins with milk, but not all milk is the same. At first, this may sound obvious, yet when we look more closely, we discover that this difference opens the door to an entire universe of flavor. Imagine a peaceful morning in the countryside, a herd of cows grazing beneath the gentle light of the rising sun. Far away, goats climb rocky hillsides. Elsewhere, sheep move across windy highlands. And in the distant north, reindeer wander through snowy landscapes. All of these animals produce milk, yet each kind of milk carries a different story. Cow's milk is often gentle, balanced, approachable, like a wide and steady river. It serves as the foundation for countless famous cheeses around the world. Goat's milk is different. It carries more mineral notes, sometimes sharper, sometimes wilder, like wind sweeping across dry cliffs. Sheep's milk contains more fat, more richness. It creates flavors that feel full and deep, like a piece of music layered with many harmonies. Buffalo milk gives us celebrated cheeses such as mozzarella di bufala, smooth, pure, elegant. And reindeer milk, something very few people have ever tasted, carries traces of northern lands, where people learn to survive under demanding conditions. Each type of milk begins from a different place, much like people begin life under different circumstances. Carl Jung believed that every individual enters the world carrying unique possibilities, unique characteristics, unique seeds waiting to grow. He once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." I often think about those words when I look at the world of cheese. Because there is no single best milk, no perfect landscape. Every place develops in its own way. Every place discovers its own identity. And it is precisely that diversity that creates beauty. Yet the origin of flavor is not determined solely by the animal. It is also shaped by what the animal eats. Imagine a spring meadow. After months of quiet winter, the first green shoots begin to emerge. Wildflowers bloom. Tiny herbs release their fragrances into the air. A herd of cows grazes there every day, feeding on different plants. And somehow, traces of that entire meadow begin to appear in the milk. This sounds more like poetry than science, yet it is completely real. Aromatic compounds found in plants can influence the composition of milk, and in turn, influence the flavor of cheese. This means that a wheel of cheese is not merely coagulated milk. It is also a record of a season, a landscape, an ecosystem, a climate, a story written by nature. In France, there is a beautiful concept known as terroir. The term is often associated with wine, but it applies equally well to cheese. Terroir can be understood as the taste of a place. It includes everything: the soil, the water, the climate, the plants, the animals, the microorganisms, and the traditions of the people who live there. Together, these elements create a flavor that can never be perfectly replicated elsewhere. Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful ideas in the world of food, that a landscape can be preserved inside a flavor. That when we taste a piece of cheese, we experience more than a food. We experience a place, a season, a fragment of the world itself. This reminds me of the way Jung viewed human beings. He never saw an individual as an isolated entity. He believed that every person carries traces of family, culture, history, and the collective unconscious. In a sense, perhaps we all have our own terroir, the experiences of childhood, the stories of our ancestors, the places where we grew up, the seasons that have passed through our lives. All of them leave their mark. Just as meadows leave their mark on milk, just as climate leaves its mark on cheese. The remarkable thing is that these influences are often subtle. We do not always notice them, yet they are always present. A skilled cheesemaker can detect the difference between spring milk and winter milk, between cows grazing in mountain pastures and cows feeding in lowland fields, between rainy years and sunny years. Every small change creates a new nuance, a new expression, a new story. And that reminds us of something profound. Nature never repeats itself perfectly. Every year is a new version. Every season is a new composition. Every wheel of cheese captures a moment that can never be recreated exactly again. Perhaps that is why people who love cheese often speak about it the same way art lovers speak about paintings, not merely with logic, but with feeling. Because they are not simply tasting flavor, they are experiencing a story. A story written by grasslands, rain, sunlight, and time. When I reflect on all of this, I think the greatest lesson is not really about cheese. It is about connection. Nothing exists independently. A wheel of cheese depends upon the animals. The animals depend upon the grasslands. The grasslands depend upon the climate. And the climate depends upon larger cycles of nature. Everything is connected. And so are we. We often think of ourselves as separate individuals. Yet we too are shaped by invisible networks of memory, culture, and environment. Perhaps that is what both Jung and the world of cheese are trying to remind us. That identity does not emerge from emptiness. It is nurtured by where we belong, by what came before us, and by connections we may not always see. But if nature determines the first notes of a cheese's flavor, another force remains equally important. A force that demands almost endless patience, the art of aging. Because even a cheese made from the finest milk and the most extraordinary landscape is not yet complete. It must still spend months or sometimes years in an aging cellar, where salt, humidity, temperature, and time come together to write the final chapter of the story. And that will be the journey of our next chapter. Part 10. The World of Cheese Rinds. In the previous chapter, we explored one of the most beautiful aspects of the art of cheesemaking, the art of aging. We saw how salt quietly guides an entire microbial ecosystem, how humidity and temperature shape the rhythm of maturation, how time, the most invisible ingredient of all, can become the most important one. And we realized that a cheese is not created in a single moment. It is formed through weeks, months, and sometimes years of slow transformation. But if everything happening inside a cheese is like a story being written in darkness, then the rind is the cover of the book. It is the first thing we see, the first clue to what has happened throughout that long journey of maturation. When people eat cheese, they often focus on the interior, the creamy center, the rich texture, the place where most of the flavor seems to reside. Meanwhile, the rind is often treated as something secondary, a simple outer layer. Yet in the world of cheesemakers, the rind is an entire universe of its own, a separate ecosystem, a living journal that records the entire life story of the cheese. I have always found that fascinating, because life often works in a similar way. We tend to focus on what lies within, our personality, our memories, our inner world. Yet what appears on the surface also tells its own story. The wrinkles on a face, the calluses on a pair of hands, the gaze of someone who has lived through many seasons, all are traces left behind by time. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that has happened in your life is still present." Perhaps a cheese rind is much the same. It is where time becomes visible, where history leaves marks that can be seen. Let us begin with one of the most famous rinds in the world, the soft white rind of brie. When people look at a mature brie, they often assume the rind is simply a layer of mold covering the outside. But the reality is far more complex. It is a living ecosystem, a community of microorganisms, coexisting, competing, collaborating, transforming their environment day after day. The delicate white strands that grow across the surface do more than create brie's distinctive appearance. They actively change the chemistry of the cheese, slowly softening the layers beneath, creating the remarkable process of ripening from the outside inward. The extraordinary thing is that all of this happens in silence. No sound, no visible movement. Yet every day, millions of tiny organisms continue their work. I often think nature has a deep affection for quiet things. Roots growing beneath the soil, stars forming inside dark clouds of cosmic dust, and a wheel of brie maturing in the stillness of an aging cellar. The most beautiful things rarely seek attention. If brie represents gentleness, then the world of washed-rind cheeses tells a very different story. Cheeses such as Epoisses and Taleggio are famous for their powerful aromas, sometimes powerful enough to surprise first-time tasters. The source of those aromas is the community of bacteria living on the surface. Throughout the aging process, cheesemakers regularly wash the rind with brine or other special solutions. This environment encourages certain bacteria to flourish. They produce aromatic compounds that are distinctive, sometimes intense, sometimes unusual, yet remarkably complex. What fascinates me is that many washed-rind cheeses smell much stronger than they actually taste, like people whose appearance seems intimidating but whose hearts are remarkably gentle. Jung spent much of his life studying this phenomenon in human psychology. He called it the difference between the persona and the deeper self. The persona is the mask we present to the world. The true self is often far more complex. Washed rind cheeses seem to teach a similar lesson. Do not rush to judge based on first impressions. Then we arrive at the bright orange rinds that often surprise newcomers. Many people assume the color comes from added dyes, yet in most cases, the orange hue is created by bacteria themselves. These tiny organisms do more than create aroma. They create color, texture, identity, the entire personality of the cheese. That realization always leaves me feeling humble, because so much of what we call beauty is created by things we never see. Perhaps life is the same. Behind every great achievement lie countless small contributions. Behind every beautiful flower lies an invisible root system. Behind every symphony lie thousands of hours of practice. And behind every cheese lie millions of microorganisms. As our journey continues, we return to blue cheese, but this time from a different perspective. If brie's rind tells a story about surfaces, blue cheese tells a story about air, about something almost invisible. Oxygen. The famous blue veins inside blue cheese can only develop when mold is given access to oxygen. That is why cheesemakers carefully pierce the cheese with long needles, creating pathways through which air can travel. At first glance, the process appears almost destructive, as though the cheese is being wounded. Yet those tiny openings create the conditions for beauty to emerge. I have always found that deeply symbolic. Many experiences leave cracks in our lives. Many events create openings we never wanted. Yet sometimes, it is through those very openings that growth becomes possible. Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Blue cheese seems to tell a similar story. That development often requires openness, space, pathways for transformation, openings through which something new can enter. But perhaps what I love most about cheese rinds is the idea that they resemble journals. Not journals written with words, but journals written with color, texture, aroma, cracks, patterns. A skilled cheesemaker can look at a rind and read its story, where it was aged, how humid the environment was, which microorganisms flourished, whether it has matured properly. Every clue is written across the surface, like growth rings in a tree trunk, like geological layers preserved in stone, like memories etched into a human face. And then we encounter even stranger elements: ash, cloth, leaves, tree bark. At first, these things seem unrelated to cheese. Yet throughout many traditional cheese-making cultures, they have played essential roles. Ash was often used to influence the pH of the surface. Leaves protected the cheese during aging. Cloth helped regulate moisture. tree bark created unique microbial environments. Together, these elements transformed cheesemaking into a collaboration between many parts of nature. Not just milk, not just bacteria, but plants, minerals, air, time, all participating in the creation of a single work of art. When I reflect on it, I believe the rind may be one of the most beautiful symbols in the entire world of cheesemaking, because it reminds us that surfaces are never merely surfaces. They are history, memory, evidence of what has taken place within, and perhaps people are the same. What others see when they look at us today did not appear by accident. It is the result of seasons that have passed, experiences that have accumulated, moments of joy, moments of loss, lessons learned, each leaving its mark, just like the rind of a mature cheese. But if the rind tells the story of formation, another question waits ahead. What truly happens when human beings taste cheese? Why do some cheeses possess powerful aromas yet surprisingly gentle flavors? Why does texture shape our perception of taste? And why can a piece of melted cheese create an entirely different experience from the same cheese served cold? That will be the journey of our next chapter, a journey into the world of flavor, perception, and the remarkable way the human brain experiences one of humanity's most extraordinary culinary creations. Part 12. The world's most unique cheeses. In the previous chapter, we discovered something truly fascinating. That flavor does not exist solely within food. It exists within the way the brain experiences food. A piece of cheese is not merely a collection of proteins, fats, and water. It is an experience, a conversation between aroma, texture, memory, and emotion. We explored how hundreds of chemical compounds create layers of complexity, how some cheeses smell far stronger than they actually taste, how warmth can awaken aromas that have been quietly sleeping within. And at the end of that journey, a question naturally emerged. If all cheese begins with milk, why has the world created so many different kinds? Why are some cheeses as soft as clouds, while others are as firm as stone? Why are some sweet like caramel, while others are salty, tangy, or gently sharp? Perhaps the answer lies in a simple truth. People in different places see the world in different ways, and when they make cheese, they are telling their own stories. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." I have often thought that this idea applies beautifully to culture as well. When people meet nature, when tradition meets necessity, when a landscape encounters the ingredients available to it, a new cheese is born, and each one carries its own philosophy. Let us begin with provolone. Born in southern Italy and later flourishing in the north, provolone feels like a bridge between tradition and adaptability. It can be enjoyed young, with a gentle and delicate character, or aged longer, becoming richer, deeper, and more complex. What I love most about provolone is its ability to change with time. It reminds me of people. We are not fixed beings. We grow. We transform. And every stage of life carries a different flavor. A child is not the same as an adult. A person at 20 is not the same person at 60. Yet they remain the same individual, just as provolone remains provolone, regardless of when it is enjoyed. From the Mediterranean countryside, let us travel northward to Norway, home to a cheese that surprises many first-time tasters. Getost. Its name simply means goat cheese, yet its flavor is anything but simple. During production, the whey is cooked for a very long time. The milk sugars slowly caramelize, creating its distinctive brown color, and a sweetness that evokes caramel, butterscotch, and condensed milk. At first, this may sound completely different from what we usually imagine cheese to be, but that is precisely what makes Getost so special. It reminds us that nature rarely follows a single path, and creativity often begins when people are willing to step beyond the familiar. Jung spent many years exploring paradoxes within the human psyche. He realized that growth does not come from eliminating opposites. It comes from learning how to reconcile them. Goethe does something similar. It is both cheese and dessert, both familiar and surprising, both simple and unexpected. Leaving the cold fjords of northern Europe behind, we arrive in India, where paneer has accompanied daily life for centuries. Paneer differs from most European cheeses. It is not aged. It requires no caves, no aging cellars, no months of maturation. Instead, it is created quickly by curdling milk with acid and pressing it into blocks. One of its most remarkable qualities is that it barely melts when heated. This makes it perfect for countless Indian dishes. Yet what I admire most about paneer is not its technical qualities. It is the philosophy hidden behind them. While many cultures seek complexity through time, paneer celebrates simplicity. It reminds us that not every form of beauty requires years to emerge. Sometimes beauty lives in simplicity, in honesty, in the things closest to us. Next comes cottage cheese, perhaps one of the humblest cheeses in the world. No ancient aging caves, no centuries-old legends, no controversial aromas, just soft curds resting gently in whey. Yet it is precisely this simplicity that has allowed it to endure. I often think of cottage cheese as the quiet people we encounter in life, not flashy, not attention-seeking, but dependable, steady, and quietly valuable. We are often drawn towards spectacular things, yet most of life is built upon simple things very much like cottage cheese, unassuming, yet essential. Then we arrive at Parmesan, or more precisely, Parmigiano Reggiano, one of the great icons of the cheese world. If paneer represents simplicity, Parmesan represents patience. Many wheels spend years maturing. Throughout that time, proteins slowly break down, flavors deepen, tiny, crunchy crystals begin to form. Each wheel becomes a treasure, sculpted by time. There is something profoundly Jungian about this image. Jung believed that genuine maturity cannot be rushed. It requires time, experience, years that may appear quiet from the outside, while deep transformations unfold within. After Parmesan comes ricotta, a cheese that carries a beautiful story about resourcefulness and creativity. The name ricotta means recooked. It is made from whey left behind after producing other cheeses. In other words, ricotta is born from what others might consider leftovers. And that is precisely why I love it, because it reminds us that value can emerge from unexpected places. Things left behind, things seemingly no longer useful, can become the beginning of something entirely new. Jung often suggested that the forgotten parts of the human psyche contain some of our greatest creative potential. Ricotta seems to tell the same story, a story about renewal, about transforming what remains into something meaningful. And finally, we come to processed cheese, perhaps the most debated cheese on this list. It represents the industrial age, modern food science, the desire to create products that are stable, consistent, and accessible. Many traditional cheese lovers dismiss it, yet I believe its story is worth hearing as well, because it reflects a deeply human need, the need to expand access, to bring food to more people, to adapt to a changing world. Perhaps it lacks the handcrafted romance of Parmesan, or the legendary mystique of Roquefort, yet it remains an important chapter in the history of cheese. And every chapter exists for a reason. When I look back at all these cheeses, what moves me most is their diversity. There is no single way to make cheese, no single definition of perfection. Each variety offers a different answer to the same question. How do we transform milk into something meaningful? And perhaps that is also one of life's great questions. Each person searches for a different answer. Each culture tells a different story. Each landscape leaves its own mark. just as every cheese carries its own philosophy of the world. Yet if cheeses reflect the diversity of culture, another conversation still awaits us. A conversation that has continued for generations. A conversation between tradition and modernity, between natural microbes and industrial processes, between raw milk and food safety. That will be the story of our next chapter, where we step into the world of bacteria, tradition, and the debates that have never truly ended within the history of cheesemaking. Part 14. When cheese becomes cultural heritage. In the previous chapter, we stepped into one of the most fascinating conversations in the world of cheese. A conversation between microbes and humans, between tradition and science, between cheesemakers guided by generations of intuition and researchers seeking to understand every chemical reaction unfolding within a wheel of cheese. We discovered that cheese is far more than food. It is a meeting place of history, biology, and culture. Yet the deeper we travel into this story, the more we realize that it extends even further, because at some point, certain cheeses moved beyond their role as nourishment. They became symbols. They became collective memory. They became part of the identity of entire regions. And that is the moment when cheese stepped out of the kitchen and into history. I have always found this remarkable. There are millions of foods in the world, yet only a handful are protected as cultural treasures. Only a few inspire legal battles, international agreements, and government regulations. What allows a wheel of cheese to reach such a status? Perhaps the answer lies in something deeply human. We do not simply love what we eat. We love the stories attached to it. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." When I first encountered this quote, I thought Jung was speaking solely about psychology, but in another sense, he was reminding us that human beings are constantly searching for identity, searching for a sense of belonging, searching for an answer to the question, where do I come from? And sometimes, a piece of cheese becomes part of that answer. Imagine someone living in Emilia-Romagna, Italy, the homeland of Parmigiano Reggiano. To them, Parmesan is not merely food. It is family history, childhood memory, the sound of ancient aging rooms, the scent of fields where cows have grazed for generations. And so, as globalization expanded and similar products appeared around the world, an important question emerged. Who has the right to use that name? Who may call their product Parmigiano Reggiano, or Roquefort, or Gruyere, or Feta? At first glance, this may seem like a commercial issue, but it is much deeper than that. Because names are not merely labels. Names are memory, geography, history, identity. That is why many cheese-producing regions have fought to protect their names. They want to ensure that a product carries a name only when it truly comes from the place that gave birth to it. Like a painting connected to its artist, like a symphony connected to its composer, a cheese remains connected to its homeland. And from this desire emerged years of legal battles, court cases, international treaties, disputes between nations, all centered around what appears to be a very simple question: who owns a name? What fascinates me most is that these debates reveal something important. Cheese has long since become more than food. Nobody spends decades arguing over something that holds no cultural meaning. Nobody builds entire legal systems to protect something unimportant. The very existence of these debates demonstrates the significance cheese has achieved. And whenever something becomes valuable, another phenomenon inevitably follows. Imitations appear. Throughout history, celebrated cheeses have always faced copies and reproductions. Some created with sincere intentions, others designed to benefit from the reputation of the original. This is not unique to cheese. It happens with wine, art, luxury goods, and nearly everything humans value. Yet I think this phenomenon reveals something profound about psychology as well. We often try to imitate what succeeds, but true identity cannot be perfectly copied. A cheese may resemble the original in shape, It may follow a similar process, but it is nearly impossible to recreate centuries of history. The climate, the soil, the water, the traditions, the accumulated wisdom of generations. Just as people can imitate another person's behavior, yet they can never fully reproduce another person's life. Jung spent many years studying what he called individuation, the process of becoming oneself. He believed that a person's greatest value lies in their uniqueness, not in becoming a flawless copy of someone else. Perhaps famous cheese regions are protecting the same thing, their uniqueness. But perhaps the most curious story in the cheese world comes from Italy, where mature wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano can be used as collateral for bank loans. The first time many people hear this, they assume it must be a joke, yet it is entirely real. These wheels are stored in specialized warehouses, carefully inspected, professionally valued, and accepted as financial assets. Why? Because their value is trusted, recognized, stable enough to serve as security. I have always loved this story, something that begins as milk, grass, microbes, eventually becomes a financial instrument, a reminder that value rarely exists solely within an object itself. Value exists within collective belief. A wheel of cheese is valuable because millions of people agree that it is valuable, much like money, much like art, much like so many things within civilization. Yet the story of cheese is older than banking. There was a time when exceptional cheeses were considered gifts worthy of kings. Rulers received them as symbols of respect, as signs of prosperity, as treasures representing the finest products of a region. Imagine such a gift in a world without electricity, without refrigeration, without modern transportation. A perfectly matured wheel of cheese represented months of labor, a truly precious offering. But cheese did not belong only to nobles and monarchs. It also traveled with ordinary people, sailors crossing oceans, soldiers marching across distant territories, merchants moving through mountains and deserts. All needed food that could last, food that was nutritious, food that was easy to transport. Cheese fulfilled those needs remarkably well. In a way, cheese helped humanity explore the world. It traveled aboard ships, along trade routes, across borders. It accompanied history itself, accompanying civilization, accompanying humanity's desire to reach beyond familiar horizons. When I reflect on this entire journey, I realize that cheese is not merely telling the story of food. It is telling the story of collective memory, the story of how communities preserve identity across generations, the story of how small things become powerful symbols. A wheel of cheese contains more than milk. It contains history, geography, pride, memory, the lives of the people who made it. Perhaps that is why great cheeses leave us feeling something deeper than simple satisfaction. They connect us to something larger than ourselves, a stream of history flowing across centuries. And yet, even beneath all these cultural stories, another layer remains, a layer hidden within lactose, casein, fat, water, climate, microbes. If this chapter has been about the heritage humans build around cheese, then the next chapter will guide us back toward the foundations beneath it all, to the place where science, nature, and art converge, to discover why a simple food became one of humanity's most remarkable inventions. Part 15. Where science, nature, and art converge. In the previous chapter, we witnessed something extraordinary, a journey in which cheese ceased to be merely food. It became heritage, a cultural symbol, a source of pride for regions that spent centuries refining it. We explored legal protections, battles over names, wheels of cheese used as financial collateral, gifts presented to royalty, sailors carrying cheese across vast oceans. And looking back upon all of this, a very natural question emerges. What allowed a product made from milk to travel so far through history? What made cheese such an enduring companion of civilization? Perhaps the answer is that cheese was never only food. It has always been a meeting place, a meeting place for nature, science, memory, creativity. If we look closely enough at a wheel of cheese, we begin to see a story spanning millions of years of evolution, thousands of years of civilization, and countless generations contributing their understanding. I have always found something beautiful in that idea, because we often imagine humanity's greatest inventions as rockets, computers, telescopes. Yet sometimes, one of the most astonishing inventions sits quietly on a dining table, a wheel of cheese. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Perhaps cheese is similar. If we only glance at its surface, we see food. But when we look deeper, an entire world appears. A world where climate plays the role of the first artist. Because every story of cheese begins with weather. A rainy spring creates different grass than a dry summer. Plants growing on mountain slopes differ from those near the sea. Cows grazing in the Alps produce different milk than cows grazing on Dutch lowlands. Climate shapes more than landscapes. It shapes flavor. Rain that fell months ago may quietly leave its signature in a piece of cheese we eat today. This always reminds me of another truth. Many influences in life seem unrelated. A conversation years ago, a book once read, a person briefly encountered, yet each may contribute to who we become. Just as spring rain contributes to the flavor of future cheese, then comes geography, mountains, valleys, rivers, soils. Each plays a role in creating identity. The French call this terroir, the beautiful idea that a landscape leaves its imprint on food. And perhaps one of humanity's most elegant discoveries is the realization that nothing truly exists in isolation. Everything belongs somewhere, to a place, a history, an ecosystem. But if climate and geography are the first artists, necessity is the force that began the entire story. Thousands of years ago, people did not make cheese to create luxury foods. They made it to survive. Fresh milk spoiled quickly. Cheese lasted much longer. It was a practical solution, a perfect example of human adaptability. What fascinates me is that so many beautiful things begin this way, not as art, but as necessity. Then over time, usefulness becomes beauty, need becomes tradition, and tradition becomes meaning. Cheese is a perfect example of that transformation. Then came inherited knowledge, one of humanity's greatest treasures. There are cheesemakers who cannot fully explain why they know a wheel is ready. They simply know, through aroma, through sound, through touch. This kind of wisdom cannot easily be written into books. It is passed from generation to generation. Jung devoted many years to studying what he called the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of shared human knowledge. Perhaps cheesemaking contains something similar, a cultural memory passed silently through time. Beneath all of this stand the quietest workers of all, microbes, invisible artisans performing millions of chemical reactions every day. Without them there would be no brie, no camembert, no parmesan, no roquefort. And the remarkable thing is that they performed this work long before humanity knew they existed. A humbling reminder that reality is always larger than our understanding. Just as the human psyche contains depths beyond conscious awareness, then comes chemistry, the invisible language describing everything that happens. At first glance, chemistry may seem dry, yet when viewed carefully, it becomes deeply poetic, because chemistry is the story of transformation, the story of one thing becoming another, the story of simple ingredients creating complexity, and nowhere is that story more visible than in cheese.